Maybe I'll just allow each of you to introduce a bit more about what you all do and how do you see the current situation. I mean, Michael gave a very good introduction or even go into much details. So how does that affect your in the various industry? Maybe I'll start with Ronald.
Good morning. I think today we see that actually the shipments, cold chain shipment that's going out actually has been, there's a lot of shipment that goes out and there's a lot of congestion going around in the world. And I think that sometimes as a packaging point of view, we find it very difficult to maintain the temperature for the product if it's extended duration that's required. So a lot of time we actually want to work with the customer even closer so that we understand actually how the routing is going, how is it, which lane they are going, so that we can actually advise, because we collect a lot of data from our loggers, from the information that we get in whether which cold room, which country has which customer cold room, how do we proceed from there, right? So I think this is what is happening today.
Yeah. I work in the freight forwarding sector. I mean, in my healthcare industry, we support all the global biopharma diagnostic companies, on their global transportation. If I look at the past 2 years when the the pandemic is raging, right? These are the group of companies that are almost mostly impacted, right? So they are the ones sending out the medical supplies, sending out the COVID testing kits. And essentially, I see they have gone through, I would say, 3 phases. The entire last 2 years is phase 1. They are scrambling for capacities. All of a sudden, when the capacity is cut in such a huge proportion, so they are struggling to get the cargoes on board. And this is even exacerbated because a lot of this shipment is temperature controlled. And some of the diagnostic companies, a lot of their shipment is actually is classified with a UNDG code. It's a DG, right? So it's even worse to get the capacity. Now we are actually stabilizing a little bit. I think with these companies, some of them are moving to the phase 2. They are talking about how to secure a long-term allocation and long-term stability in pricing. So all sort of arrangement, ongoing discussions about block space, about even the monthly or quarterly charter, you name it. Yeah, all the topics are actually on the table, right? So I see we are heading to the next stage. Is how to secure the capacity, stability of the capacity, and at a more optimized risk profile. Basically, instead of relying on, there are actually, a lot of companies are actually relooking into the sourcing strategy instead of pull all the volumes into so-called qualified vendor. Can we open up into more choices? Access to more capabilities worldwide. So the phase 3 is more geared towards how to make the supply chain, the future cold chain supply chain, even more risk-proof, from economy-based in the past into a risk-based supply chain. Yeah, so these are the sort of three things I see in my industry. Yeah.
Hi, good morning. So my name is Kevin. Okay, I work for DFI Retail Group. Okay, so I'm in the food industry. Okay, so basically, if you talk about cold chain, there's going to be a demand, right? Whether you're looking at now or in the future. So with food industry, right? So you have a lot of things that where you go short shelf lives, then you need the items like yesterday kind of thing. So at the end of the day, it's all about sustainability. Okay? For food, basically, is how do we keep the costs low, for the consumers. And if you are looking at if you are importing products from UK, the US, these are short shelf lives, you don't have the volume and you're looking to get it, within the next 3 or 4 days, and you have your items which are going to sit on the supermarket shelf for maybe 4 days the most. So if you're looking at this cycle, at the end of the day is how fast can you get the product from point A to your doorstep, to your supermarkets with the least cost. So at the end of the day, to me, is I think based on what we are looking at is cost efficiency. Yeah, so I think that's for the food industry.
Thanks. Well, med supply as part of International SOS. So our business is basically rescuing people when they get in trouble. So for instance, in Papua New Guinea, a lot of our customers are in remote locations in the jungles. In Papua New Guinea, part of our responsibility is vectoring. So we go to a camp and we make sure that there's no snakes on the camp. It's a funny thing to do, but we actually have snake handlers. So if anyone's interested in that job, let me know. There are 1,000 deaths a year in Papua New Guinea. So our responsibility as med supply is to make sure that we can procure anti-venom, which is very expensive, $3,000 or $4,000 a shot. To make sure we can procure this, get it to Papua New Guinea in the right temperature, store it in the fridge without powers going off and making sure that's fine. So when someone is unfortunate enough to meet a snake and get bitten, we're there to save his or her life. Now, getting the venom, getting it there and storing it is a massive problem. There's capacity problems. The manufacturer of the snake venom is exhausted because to make anti-venom, you need snakes first to milk them, and all. It's quite complicated. So when a freight forwarder that we use loses anti-venom, or potentially the airport it leaves it in the sun, or the packaging fails, then we have a massive issue, because not only have we wasted a lot of money, but potentially we're putting someone's life at risk because we don't have the supplies on hand. So I think to sum up, our major problem is getting the right medical supplies at the right condition to the patient on time.
Great. And after you listening to all the speakers, you realize actually that's happening in freight, not just cold chain, right? Not just healthcare, not just food. You actually see it in high tech as well. Just that, healthcare probably can afford to pay for quality food, yes, but high tech, maybe we don't pay. So I encourage you all to think about some takeaways and even questions that you all may have as we move through the panel. Okay, so maybe start from Kevin or Michael. Is there some challenges that or wish list that you would like our providers to do or to be ahead of the game in this current time and age? Kevin?
Okay, so for food industry, I think we talked about air freight earlier. So the biggest challenge that we have currently, right? So there is a temperature exposure, especially at the origin and also at the destination. The point of loading onto the aircraft and unloading from the aircraft, right? So if you're looking at Europe, for example, in UK, when we load the aircraft, the weather is very nice, you don't get so much exposure. But when it lands in Singapore, so that's the biggest problem, right? Because you are in a tropical island, so your temperature just shoots up. Now, if your aircraft, depending on the aircraft size, it takes time for the cargo to be unloaded, especially if you are a passenger plane, So your cargo can be sitting on the tarmac for at least an hour before it even gets to cool port, right? So when we look at the data loggers or the data that we have, we always see a bit of a fluctuation, especially in Singapore. But you don't see that much at the origin, especially if you are coming out from UK, US kind of areas. So I think the biggest challenge is how do we keep the temperatures cool enough, so that you don't see so much fluctuation and the quality assurance guys don't flag it out. So I think that's the biggest challenge right now in the food industry.
I think proactiveness, information. When I order a $16 pizza from and I have it on my app, I can see exactly where it is and everything else. When I order a book on Amazon, it tells me when it's fulfilled, when it's shipped, when it's on the way. When we spend a couple of $1,000s with a freight forwarder with some vaccine, you have to call them and say, where is it? Did they make the flight? So yeah, it's proactiveness. It's some forwarders are better than others, but my team sitting over there, they lose sleep at night because they wait to see whether the airline in Europe made the connection. That shouldn't be our job. We would like to receive that from the forwarders so we can sleep at night and have a peace of mind.
So, Shen Jie, being the provider global, maybe you can share some light, how we doing and what do we need as an industry to help you?
Yeah, I think to stay ahead of game in the healthcare coaching, there are a few things in my mind. Number one is what Michael was mentioning, the proactiveness. In fact, if you listen to Michael's previous presentation, he actually highlighted a lot of things in it. One is actually the technology, and another is actually the control tower they mentioned, and then proactiveness. And this is really the key thing. I mean, if you look at one of the key things that coming out of this past pandemic, you can see there's a lot of companies, shippers, as well as the freight forwarder, are setting up control towers, right? Control tower is a thing, but this control tower of next generation is very different from old generation control tower where we just have a few warm body taking up a phone call and tracking the shipment status. This next generation control tower is a lot of data driven. Right? Data logger, everybody know how to use data logger, right? But the point is how to use this data logger to be proactive, yeah. So some of the control tower, in fact, we are investing in a control tower. We're actually using the data, the IoT devices, blended with automated workflow, meaning the data is able to change, to trigger the proactive contingency planning when the shipment is in the emergency stages, right? So there are a lot of tools currently available in the market. It's basically how a control tower setting can pull this data together to trigger a real-time operational intervention, right? So think about it, the temperature deviation, if it is 2 to 8 degree shipment, what if your logger tells you it goes beyond 8 into 9 or 10? So the automated workflow tools is able to push out alert to the entire operation system, either the trigger, the quarantine of the shipment, trigger for additional documents to qualify a QA release. So these are all the tools that the industry are already setting up, to turn the data into an operational capability. So I think this is very prominent that I see. So the next generation of a control tower is a lot of AI driven. Yeah. I think this is one thing I can think of to stay ahead in the pharma coaching. The second thing I can think of is actually the entire space of quality assurance, quality QA element. Because a QA is a very powerful functions in pharma or healthcare company, everything they do needs to be QA validated, be of supplier, or even you move on a certain lanes, they have to have the lane QA validated. Even the container or shipper box, you have to be QA validated. So that's why the whole QA requirement is actually trigger the next generation of logistic company like ours to be QA compliant. So a lot of a company like ours, we are investing in a pharma healthcare QA structure to really make sure our process is in sync with GDP, GMP, all of this quality industry QA standard. So proactively managing the way we QA validate everything we do and make sure we are in sync with them. So these are the really in thing, and I feel as a logistic company, if you are able to really up the game on the QA awareness, and then up the game in terms of technology adoptions, and turn it into a real power of operation, and you are actually good, yeah.
Just now, Michael said about smart box, right? Putting intelligence into visibility of our boxes, packaging, and everything. So, Ronald, is there anything you would like to add or something that you can share with the audience?
I think for packaging itself, this is so much we can do, because as a passive packaging, you can improve the insulations, you can improve the coolants, last the duration longer. But there's always a lot of unpredicted things that will happen when it goes up, the box goes up. So I think we realized that the last few years, we actually collect a lot of data from all this packaging, not just internal, but also external. So with that itself, we actually share with a lot of customers who wanted to use the packaging and share with them the lanes that they're going, what type of facilities is available, what they can use, what is open for them, so that they can actually be able to plan the route better. I think on top of that, other than getting all the data or maybe real-time data, I think predictive model would be something very interesting to look at, something where you actually can predict how much more the packaging will last for the duration that you're going through. So that's something that we probably can look at, yeah.
I'll have a pause here for any questions or comments, or even something that you want to share, like your experience or anybody. And help the mic.
Yeah, great comment so far on the panel. Just had a question on, there's a lot of discussion about data in control towers. There's a lot of people developing them, whether it's the ERP providers, the logistics providers. So, where do you see the trend going in terms of who ultimately should own the data? And then from that standpoint of control, then, what do you foresee? Is it, should companies that are out there looking to get actionable data in their hands, should they be investing in their own systems or their ERP provider? Should they be going to the logistics provider? Where do you see this trend going?
Sorry, sir. What is your name and your company, please?
Oh, sorry, Steve Lesser, and I'm representing Tag and Track, which is a label and tag visibility system.
Michael, since you want to take this?
Thanks, Steve. Good question. No? Yep. So I think, a good question. I think there's probably two answers to that, or two possibilities. One, the logistics company. So for companies of massive size, the integrators, DHL and so forth, they have control towers because it makes sense, because they just have the size. If you're a shipper and you're using tag and track or devices on your parcels across 4 or 5 forwarders, that's when it gets complicated, because you can't go to each forwarder. So you don't want one forwarder knowing what you're giving the other forwarder. So I think the technology companies, the Yogis, the Forkites, the Project 44s, these companies were probably better suited because they're aggregators of information, and they're neutral. It doesn't matter what freight company you use, which airline you use, which shipping company they use. They aggregate this and they give it to you as one message. So I would say it's two. One, if you're big enough, you should have your own towers. If you're, but also I think the technology providers, the platform operators, have to come up with their own control tower. But the other thing they need to do is very important, is they should not just be mailboxes sending you an email to say your shipment's in trouble. What you expect them to do is, your shipment's in trouble, we've contacted your freight forwarder, they've arranged a separate flight, and this is what's happening, go back to sleep. That's what we're looking for.
I will add a few points here.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, maybe I will add a few points here. I think if the control tower is operated by the freight forwarder like us, yes, we hold a lot of this data. But this data, if you listen to our shippers, our customers, do they really need months of this data? Actually, no. They actually frequently told us, when we talk about the data integration, lots of them prefer to have the access of data in a more analyzed and aggregated way rather than the, on time every minute, yeah. So for them, they want to useful data. They sometimes have a very specific purpose for certain data. One of the purpose I can think of is actually their QA validation. So they need this data to prove certain solutions, certain routing actually meet the QA requirement. So there is one set of requirements is actually QA required data. Another set of the data they may need is actually related to corrective actions. So when things doesn't go well, so they have a process called the kappa process, where you really need to use a data approach to analyze what is the area that goes wrong. You really need data point to prove it, quantify it, and using whatever the QA tools to design corrective actions and preventative actions in the future. So these are the two areas they typically reach us to us and pull the data. But on an ongoing basis, no, they prefer we keep the data. Yeah.
Gentlemen?
Yeah, hi, I'm Chris Crawley. I work for SkyCool. We make and sell a very effective cool roof coating. It's used on warehouses, refrigerated trucks, anything where you're trying to keep temperatures cooler. And my question is this, we're seeing more and more of our customers where they have stresses in their systems and they're not actually able to meet target temperatures, let's say in warehouses, and then you have hot spots, and of course that causes problems with their customers. Are you guys starting to do supply chain thermal stress testing, where you're actually going through your supply chain and making sure you have sufficient capacity throughout that supply chain, given the kind of delays we're seeing in the last couple of years on containers stuck in ports and things like that, and rising temperatures where your warehouses are located? Thank you.
Thanks. Good question. So I think from my past experience in my previous role with Markin, when we had a partnership with a pharmaceutical company that were launching a drug, what's paramount is packaging qualification, where you would actually ship simulated vaccines, so water, around the world in the most difficult routes. So for instance, if you're shipping something from Korea to San Francisco, you would send it through Abu Dhabi or Dubai or Europe. So you would give it the worst case scenario. You would stress the route, you would stress the packaging, and only when you had proven that you could do it on these difficult routes and the FDA want to see the results, could you then continue to import those drugs. But I think in terms of stress testing of infrastructure, I mean, Shenji, you run a pretty sophisticated.
I wouldn't use the word stress test, because if you operate the warehouse or operate proposing a cold chain container solutions, yeah, what we typically do is a lot of things happened before it go live. It's something we call it a QA validation process. Yeah. So basically, we need to validate everything we propose. Yeah, validate meaning by providing the real data to it before operation go live. Yeah. So once it's sort of approved and tested, it can be quite a technical process where in a warehouse setting we do the 3D mapping of the temperature, and then really adjust the location, adjust the configuration, and even we need to build a process of to really on a quarterly basis to recalibrate the whole thing. So you have to set the whole thing up far in advance. And then one is operationalize it, and then this is really where the SOP take place. SOP in terms of how often you read the data, SOP in terms of what really what happens when it triggers, yeah, and how often you validate and then calibrate the whole thing. So I wouldn't say stress tests on an ongoing basis, but rather in a quite planned way, yeah.
Good. Any other questions from the floor? Okay. Anyway. No? Yes, Kevin.
Hi, my name is Kelvin. I'm with Project 44. Very interesting conversation. I am not a coaching expert, right? But I do like to ask about some observations I've made in terms of some of might be your response. Now, it's true, we do a lot of control tower related work. And when I go into some of my systems, right, very often I see temperature breaching the range that has been set, 2 to 8, for example. And in the case of perishables, it's very often that we have seen data points, right, okay, whereby the food, a truckload of food at the various SKU level, actually, in fact, has breached the temperature range that has been set. My number one question, right, okay, is as shippers, or in the case of as potential customers, what do you actually do with it when you notice that there's a temperature excursion? Do you all reject the shipment, or what do you actually do? Second point, right, okay, being, if you're in the IoT space, or if you're talking about predictive analytics, there are many ways, right, okay, whereby you can get preemptive notification so that you can do some reaction if you notice there's a leaning or a trending towards an excursion. But why is it that in the industry, right, okay, a lot of the companies are still leaning on loggers, which is a post information? Okay, so I'm just perplexed, right, okay, as to technology is clearly there, but the adoption doesn't seem to be there. And secondly, right, okay, given the fact that you do not adopt the technology, as a result, you have a lot of this excursion. What do you do with the food that actually, right, okay, suffers through this excursion?
Can I just address and I'll pass on to the food. So I think three questions there, right? One was what do we do with the, once we find out that there's been excursion? And second, okay, let me just answer the first, otherwise I get lost. So I have to be careful because my quality manager's listening to this, so I have to remember the SOP. So if we have a temperature excursion, we then quarantine the vaccine, which then we normally go, it depends on the time, and you know, if it's been exposed to 2 degrees above 8 for 1 hour, generally it's fine. If it's been sitting in the sun for a week at 30 degrees, it's definitely not fine. But generally we go back, QA will then quarantine this. We then could go back to the manufacturer of that vaccine and say, what's the efficacy of that now it's been exposed to that? And if they give the sign off, then we use it, otherwise we have to discard it. Your point about why people are using what we call in the industry dumb loggers, which are basically loggers that tell you the temperature once the shipment arrives. Yes, unfortunately we still do that, and we shouldn't because it's not preventative. By using active IoT devices and platforms such as yourself, we should be told before the event happens. So when we see that something is rising up, we can actually call the forward and do something. So that's the third question was what we do with the food, right? So I'll let.
Okay, so basically, if you look at the food industry, so if you have a temperature fluctuation or whatever it is, so when it comes in, right, what happens is that we usually put in a quarantine. So similar to vaccine also, we have to put it under quarantine, under SFA regulations, right? So other than that, you look at the SOPs that you have. So between the tolerance levels, so what happens is that if it's way above the tolerance level, right, so most of the time it's discarded because it's a food safety issue. Now, if it's within the tolerance level, depending on the product itself, so if you are looking at things like dairy or meat, so usually what happens is for dairy, we will discard because again, it's very susceptible to bacteria. But for meat, normally what happens is we will send to a independent lab test. Okay, so again, SFA's regulation versus your own company's policy. Sometimes your company's policy is stricter than your SFA regulations. So it is very much dependent on the SOP that a company has. So certain companies, what they do is that, you know, if it's a $200,000 worth of meat, you know, okay, you went out of temperature, I prove it, I just claim it from insurance. Yes, there's wastage, but unfortunately, it's food safety. So it's a product integrity issue and versus, you know, whether do you want to salvage anything. But again, if you look at regulatory authorities, right, they do not allow salvaging for human consumption. So most of the time, it's either you write it off, and probably you might want to, you know, donate it to a zoo or, you know, some animal shelter kind of thing. You do that? Yeah, so I would say it's more of a SOP thing. Yeah. So the reason why a lot of food industry or even some industry, they use dumb loggers or data loggers, I think is due to the cost. Okay, it's a one-time thing. You just put it into a shipment, which can be pallets, can be container loads or container, and it just comes to the end destination. And these guys, the QA will read the data and see, yeah, everything is in order. So I think at the cost efficiency level, yeah, it's cheap, and you can buy in bulk, and it's a one-time use and throw it away. So I think that's the main purpose of these data loggers, rather than using IoT. IoT is, you have a cost there, and at the end of the day, you are keeping your food prices down, and where does this cost go to? Who's going to absorb the cost, right? So I think that is my, yeah. Thank you.
Okay, good. I'll move to the next section, which
Sorry,
is...
Kendrick, may I have a follow-up question? This is Kelvin here again.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, sorry. So I trust that we leave the food safety in the good hands of Kevin and the team. Okay, we get stomachache, we come to you. Right. I just want to ask the experts, right, okay, on one last question. Many years ago, right, okay, actually I probably enabled FedEx first sense-aware movement. Okay, and back then, right, I remember it was very complicated because the IoT devices, right, are considered telecommunication devices. Is it still as complicated as what it used to be? Because I remember you need to have got proper certification before you can do cross-border and stuff like that. So I just, perhaps for my own benefit, right, okay, has things gotten simpler from the regulatory and customs angle when it comes to moving IoT devices for coaching movements?
I remember testing one of those SensorTech, the red ones for FedEx across into Malaysia. Yes, so it's become easier. IoT companies use global SIM cards. They have global agreements across the world in telecommunications. They do still run into difficulties in certain countries. Certain countries, we shall not name, declare these devices as almost military, spy-type things. It's quite difficult to get them into the countries. I think some customs regimes also want to charge duty on these tracking devices, which is a problem. So yeah, we're not there yet as an industry, but it is getting better.
Okay, so it's time to pivot to the next section, right, which is really the future of cold chain. And I want to, just put up there that there's some collaboration initiatives or things to look out for in a few years to come. So maybe just start from Michael, then we move back down. Yeah.
I think, without wanting to repeat, I think technology is going to drive the future of logistics, particularly cold chain, and particularly around the quality of pharmaceutical. I think, the combination of AI, analytics, and robotics automation is going to deliver massive improvements. What I think is still missing as an industry is the sharing of information. When you go to a bank or an investment company or insurance, it's regulated, it's graded, it's Moody's. If you go to a freight forwarder, good luck. It's based on reputation. When you book a hotel, you can see comments there. It's rated 4 to 5 stars or whatever. Again, when you go to the forwarding industry or an airline, it's not. So I think there's a great opportunity for us as a logistics community to share anonymized data on performances of the providers, the airlines, the ports, the packaging companies, the technology companies, because that will help drivers' decisions, and it will also, make the companies that aren't performing, buck up. So that's, if I could summarize, that would be it.
So I think in the food industry, one of the things is, of course, the cost, right? So we need to look at cost efficiencies and whatnot. Again, when we talk about that, it's always collaboration between the suppliers and the buyers, right? So what kind of packaging you use, how do we keep the costs, at a minimal, not to inflate the end price of the product. And the other thing also, I think, if you look at the warehouses, if you actually look at robotics, in the market, there is very little robotics for cold chain. Yeah, most of the cold chain is either using ASRS or most of the time is conventional warehouses. I think this is due to probably the condensation part, okay? Because a cold chain warehouse, you have multiple temperatures. You can have anything from 0 degrees to minus 22 to plus 12, right? So your robotics or the robots cannot sustain that condensation. So, I mean, I talked to a lot of my peers, they don't have this kind of robotics in the market yet. Okay, so it's not saying it's not coming, but yeah, it's not yet. So it's still labor intensive, and you know there is always somebody down the line, somebody is going to put a pallet somewhere and forget about it. You know, so you will have this temperature fluctuation issue. Yeah, so I think at the end of the day, if you look at it, AI robotics will be a help to the cold chain industry, but when that will happen, I think is still yet to be seen. Okay.
If I talk about the future of a healthcare supply chain, I see one trend, and in fact, is really most talked about the trend, is the whole healthcare industry is actually transforming from, if in the past, a little bit cost-based supply chain model into a much more risk-based supply chain model. What does that mean is, in the past, you know, the healthcare companies are probably most risk-averse group of people in the world, yeah. They typically give out like multi-year, 8-year, 5-year contract to suppliers. So to a selected group of suppliers, so they need economic of scale. I see some big global medical device companies having 2 tier 1 supplier and 2 backup vendor for the entire global distribution, right? So when the market is good, so that means the market is stable, capacity is stable, and pricing is stable, you can run it stably, right? But the past 2 years, you can see what happened in the market, and these are the people most disrupted left and right, right? So what the risk-based supply chain model means is, I can literally see these people are actually open themselves up much more than before, instead of constrain them to the so-called strategic partner. They are actually open up much more to look at what other capacity and capability available in the market, you know, so really to balance it out, yeah. So it's for them to access a greater flexibility, greater capacity, yeah, to withstand the future sort of a shock, yeah. And also another way these people to address the risk is to really explore the different mode of transportation. And traditionally the healthcare company, they are the hardcore air freighters, right? They use airs. But now they're actually looking at how to future-proof the global transportation by making trucking, rail, and even ocean into the part of the integrated network, right? So to really orchestrate a much more dynamic transportation model, this comes to the previous point, they are actually using the technology and control tower, the technology enable the control tower to really oversee all of this different, a much more extended network in the future, and then QA-proof everything. So in the future, I can see it's going to be a lot of more risk mitigation, risk planning far in advance, rather than economy of scale by pulling the volumes. Yeah, so I think this is, I see very prominent in my sector. Yeah.
I think for my view of packaging itself, angle of packaging itself, I think technology is still going to be the driving factor for sure. And what type of packaging is coming out, how to manage the data, how to be predictive, and also eventually coming towards climate neutral is one of the driving factors coming up very fast. So this is going to be some of the things that we will be working on. And also, we also wish to see that, you know, like for instance, forwarder or whoever can actually be able to be agile in changing, because sometimes we always say that, if you ship it as a perishable 15 to 25, you cannot change them because it's going to be from point to point. But what happens if that it comes to a point where you can't use 15 to 25 anymore? You have to change it to 2 to 8. Would that be able to change? So really hope that that can be changed and be able to adapt to these type of changes. Yeah.
Great. We are coming to the end of the session. So just, this is one of the good takeaways, right? Where I try to understand cold chain from the perspective of a high-tech guy. So to me, cold chain will be the top high-quality, going to remote areas type of execution, right? Then we have the food, and then last the high-tech, where we want everything but don't want to pay, right? So allow maybe everyone to just share your takeaways for the audience, whether they are shippers or providers. Some quick notes, yeah? Starting back from Ronald.
I think change is common. I think this is going to be forever, it's going to be. And I think using big data to be able to be agile in the way that we actually do shipment, I think that's something to think about.
Yeah, I'm a freight forwarder. One of the things I want to tell is don't always come here to squeeze us on the transportation cost, yeah? Because if your shipment is not well planned, you lost a lot more if your cold chain shipment gets stuck somewhere and no mitigation, yeah.
I think the key takeaway will be basically technology itself. So how do we use the technologies to help both the shippers and also the consignees, and how do we even share the data along between the few parties that's involved in one shipment. So I think at the end of the day, if you look at it, it's going to be all about automated flow workflows, and using technologies to help for better decision making kind of thing. Yeah.
Thanks. Proactiveness. I'm very surprised when we call companies and they tell us that, yeah, we don't have the capacity or we don't have that because, there's COVID. And I'm like, really? We haven't heard of COVID. So I think proactiveness, companies need to get ready and we are responsible for some of the mess that we're in. Quality, we cannot risk, you've seen the statistics, 50% of vaccines are destroyed before they get to where they're supposed to. That's our responsibility as an industry to change that. And innovation through technology. This is really the driving force of all of this.
Great. Thanks the panel for the insightful discussion, and I hope you all gain much from them. Thank you very much. I just want